Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erd Tree, has been a remarkable addition to what was already established as a masterpiece of a video game. This new DLC can even be considered an expansion due to the vast amount of content it brings with it. And while I've been enjoying my time exploring the new lands, along with getting my butt kicked repeatedly by the new bosses, there is one thing that frustrates me so much about this game that prevents me from saying it's a perfect 10 out of 10. Let's discuss that in this video. Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on, guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel, and I hope you've all been doing well. It's been a while since the last upload on the channel. I decided to take a bit of a break, take a vacation, and also travel a bit, which was fun, but I also ended up getting quite sick upon returning from my trip, which sucked, so I decided to take things a bit easy for now, and aside from that, not much going on in the PC gaming tech space. We just had Computex earlier this month, but nothing really substantial was showing off, aside from maybe Ryzen 9000. Thankfully, upon returning from my trip, I had Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erd Tree, to keep myself occupied with as I battled this terrible sinus infection and hopefully get my voice back soon. I gotta say, this DLC, if we can even call it that, because it feels like a vast expansion if anything, it's been fantastic, and my time so far has been akin to when I first arrived to the lands between in Elden Ring. As soon as you enter the Land of Shadows and gaze upon the shadowy Erd Tree, it's a breathtaking moment. You feel like just how you first saw the regular Erd Tree in the base game. I was finding my time to be quite enjoyable as I explored the new areas of the game, explored new dungeons, and ruins to discover new items, weapons, armor, and more. Though it has to be said that this new DLC isn't just a walk in the park. The difficulty has been ramped up quite a bit from what you were accustomed to compared to the base game, where even the basic mobs in the Lands of the Shadow will destroy you if you're not careful. If you're somebody who's been active in the FromSoft and Souls community, then you're probably aware of how the DLC has received mixed reviews, where a big portion of the negativity has stemmed from players saying it's too difficult. I personally don't see it that way, and I actually welcome the difficulty spike because this is what these games are all about, and this is what the director himself had alluded to right from the very start. If you were expecting to steamroll through this DLC with your level 300 character, well, it looks like you're going to be in for quite a shock. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect. There are definitely areas in which they can improve the design going forward, but I'm not saying it's impossible either. Furthermore, the degree to which this DLC becomes difficult to depends highly on the way you're going to be approaching the challenge. If you're somebody who's going to be running around with no armor, a dagger, with no level ups, then you're going to be in for quite a ride. My approach to this game has been comparable to how I approach other RPGs, where I take my time in exploring the lands, attaining upgrades, and optimizing my build, but where I'm also not just chasing broken or overpowered configurations to essentially cheese bosses, if you know what I mean. But I'm honestly surprised people have been complaining about difficulty, because if they hadn't done this and the DLC bosses weren't that much different compared to the base game, then a lot of people would have steamrolled through it, and then you'd have people complaining that it was too easy. Now, speaking of bosses, do I think they're a bit overtuned and overwhelming? Sort of. It depends on what kind of build you're running and your style of play. What I will say though is that it would have been nice for FromSoft to give us some sort of parry mechanic similar to Sekiro. I think to this date, Sekiro's combat system is unmatched, and a game like Lies of P is what they could perhaps inspire a design from, because in Lies of P, they did a pretty good job at blending in the parry elements along with your typical dodge/roll mechanic. But in Elden Ring, you're essentially just given a roll, and that's it unless you pull out a parry buckler, but that also doesn't go well with a lot of builds. The reason why I say this is because if you compare a boss like Slave Knight Gale from the Dark Souls 3 DLC to someone like R'hllana in the Elden Ring DLC, there's quite a stark difference in terms of how hyperactive the bosses are with their combos, their chain of attacks, and the open windows of opportunities the player gets. I'm not saying Slave Knight Gale was an easy fight. I died quite a lot to him at the first time I fought him, but never did I feel like it was an unfair or impossible challenge. It was a very fun fight, and he's one of my favorite bosses from the entire series. Now, when it comes to a boss like R'hllana, I'm not saying she's impossible either, but I can see why some people were calling it unfair, because these new bosses are just so advanced and hyper aggressive. The way she zips around, her combos, and the chain of attacks, you feel like there's very little openings, and when you do strike, the damage you do to the boss feels insignificant, and then you just wait for the cycle to repeat itself. So often there are moments where I'm sitting back waiting for my opening, where I'm thinking to myself, wow, it'd sure be great if I had some sort of parry mechanic from Sekiro, so I too can be trading blows with the boss. Take a boss fight like Ishin. He's regarded as one of the hardest boss fights in, I guess, guess all of gaming you could even say. He's got crazy combo moves, but with the combat mechanics Sekiro had and its gameplay style, it all flows so well where even when you're on the defensive, you still feel like you're making an impact thanks to the posture bar or stagger bar, whereas in Elden Ring, you're like waiting for the boss to finish their moves, and then you gotta go in and dish out like 1 or 2 hits, then rinse and repeat, and you gotta make sure you don't miss your window, otherwise you're just gonna be standing there, taking in all the damage. Lies of P also did a really good job at this. The bosses in that game, especially the end game bosses, are also very hyper aggressive like Elden Ring's DLC bosses. Take someone like Luxasia for example. She would zip around all over the place, but because you can counter or parry the bosses, they can also be staggered and sometimes damaged during their combos, along with the open windows you get to attack back. Now, I know they've also added a deflection heart tier which introduces a similar mechanic, but it's not permanent and it isn't compatible with a lot of builds. With all that said, I was still having a lot of fun with the boss fights, and at the end of the day, like I said, you make it more difficult upon yourself depending on your playstyle. If you don't want it to be so tough, then by all means, use summons or spirit ashes if that makes the game more enjoyable for you. Don't get caught up in the whole right way to play argument that some people are so keen on doing to others online with their elitist takes. Just enjoy the game for what it is. Play the game like you want and, just have a good time. But that's all I've got to say about the whole fiasco surrounding the difficulty complaints. Where I personally have a bigger problem with the game is with From Software's inability to optimize the game and bring it to 2024 standards of technicality. This has also been another major contributor to the mixed reviews of the DLC because a lot of people were anticipating that there would be a major performance patch. Now, a performance patch doesn't necessarily have to coincide with the release of a DLC or expansion. They should be able to do this at any time if they really cared, but I was thinking that perhaps maybe with a DLC update to this game that would also bring back a lot of interest, they would also take the opportunity to address the performance issues a lot of the player base on the PC had to endure with from the start. But unfortunately, nothing of the sort has happened, which is a damn shame considering how successful this game has been across all the platforms. Digital Foundry's recently put out a pretty good video highlighting the performance on current gen consoles as well as on the PC. They've used various sorts of hardware from mid-range and high-end hardware, and their critique has been on point. I'll have the link to that video in the description. I definitely recommend checking it out for yourself.
The last nail in the coffin for me is that the game still suffers from consistent and constant frame time spikes due to CPU performance for some reason when moving around the game world. With the latest patch, still has incredible issues delivering smooth frame times when you just move the thumbstick forward. These frame time spikes occur every few meters really in my measurement and make the game look unsmooth to the naked eye. Given how the game has the technical density and quality of something that came out in 2015, I'm just kind of in awe at how this issue is happening in the first place. On a higher end CPU like the 7800X3D, you can reduce the frequency of how often these hitches will occur, but they occur nonetheless, just with greater distance between when they're happening. And I'm not even using ray tracing here, I'm just confused as to why I'm still seeing hitches on a 7800X3D in a game that looks like this. So things are bad just like we measured years ago. From Software needs to stop releasing things of such poor technical quality given how much money they bring in and how much money the products demand. Shadow of the Erd Tree here does nothing to meaningfully solve the issues the game had years ago, and in fact it may be worse in some areas.
It's 2024. The game should have been updated to support beyond 60 FPS. It should have upscaling, especially considering that they've added ray tracing to this game after launch. It still has no ultra-wide support, nor does it even offer a basic FOV slider along with a magnitude of other technical issues like horrible shader compilation stuttering. This was the same sort of criticism we gave to a game like Starfield when it came out, but eventually through patches they were able to bring up the performance and they were able to add in features that were missing like frame generation or an FOV slider. So it's quite disappointing that over 2.5 years we still don't see this, and also to see how people who are running top tier hardware such as a 7800X3D CPU, a 4090 or 4080 GPU are having problems with performance. Now I anticipate that there will be some folks who are probably going to be commenting stating that the game can go beyond 60 FPS because the engine is tied to the frame rate, but I can confirm that simply is not true because there is an unofficial FPS unlock mod which you can download to run run the game higher than 60 FPS, and it causes no issues. The reason why I personally don't do that is because since it's an unofficial mod, you have to disable the anti-cheat to use it to prevent yourself from getting banned online, and that also means that you can't play online, which makes it a deal breaker for me because I really enjoy the multiplayer aspect of this game. I like being able to tackle dungeons cooperatively, also helping other players fight bosses. I like doing PvP a lot, whether that's through invasions or in the dueling arena. Also a really nice and fun way to farm for rune arcs, because that's definitely needed in the DLC. I'm honestly surprised that we haven't gotten some sort of performance patch, because a game that they released last year called Armored Core 6 had an FPS cap as well, but that FPS cap was at 120 FPS, and it didn't have any of the stuttering issues like Elden Ring. Now, to be fair, that's a smaller scaled game versus an open world game like Elden Ring, but nonetheless, I think they should allow for 120 FPS to be the cap, as that would cover most of the qualms people have with the performance, and they should pre-compile shaders at the start of the game. Now, me critiquing the game like this doesn't necessarily mean that it's unplayable. At least it wasn't for me on my rig. But then again, I was running some pretty high-end hardware, and I know not everyone can afford a 4090 or a 14900K, and as most people are probably running in an RTX 3060 level GPU and a Ryzen 5 5600. I do recall when I reviewed the RTX 3050, and Elden Ring was a game that I tested since it came out around the same time, it ran decently with medium to high settings, so the game itself isn't necessarily demanding, it just seems to have a lot of shader compilation stuttering and some optimization issues where it's not actually leveraging or fully utilizing the hardware. The worst is when it happens during boss fights. Boss fights, especially with the DLC bosses, can get a bit crazy with all the particle effects and objects, so when those stutters occur or you get massive frame drops, you're basically guaranteed a death. One other thing I will add, and this is for those who are having stuttering problems in this game, is to check your video settings, because for some reason, by default, ray tracing is set to enabled. Turn it off, because ray tracing in this game isn't even all that great, and the performance impact is quite large, and it introduces a lot of stuttering. In any case, not being able to enjoy the game due to not having access to higher refresh rates, without foregoing online play, no ultra-wide support, no pre-compiling of shaders, it's all what I deem to be unacceptable in 2024. And this is coming from a AAA game studio. This isn't a small indie dev team. Trying to remain optimistic about a future performance patch is difficult as well, considering they've had like 2.5 years since launch where they could have fixed performance and brought some much needed quality of life additions, but unfortunately they didn't, so I wouldn't really get your hopes up. Other than that, I've been having fun with the DLC, and I'm looking forward to exploring more, getting more weapons, engaging in even more thrilling boss fights. Well, that's going to do it for this one, you guys. We'll touch base in the next video. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.